He stood in front of the camera, surrounded by friends, laughing into a live stream that would one day be entered into the public record as part of a murder investigation. The mansion behind him was filled with people, music, and an unmistakable smell. A smell so strong, so saturating, so impossible to ignore that he felt the need to address it directly. He grinned, gestured around the room, and offered an explanation that would later become one of the most chilling sentences ever uttered on a live broadcast. He told them the bathroom was backed up. He told them not to worry about it. He told them everything was fine. And according to prosecutors, at that very moment, the body of a 14-year-old girl named Celeste Rivas Hernandez was decomposing inside that house, or inside the Tesla parked just outside it, in a state so advanced that no plumbing problem on Earth could have produced what those guests were breathing in. His name is David Anthony Burke. The world knows him as D4VD, the singer behind viral hits, a debut album, a sold-out world tour, and a fan base of millions. But today his name appears on charging documents that allege first-degree murder, continuous sexual abuse of a child under the age of 14, and the unlawful mutilation of human remains. And the footage from that live stream, once a casual moment shared with fans, has now become evidence in a case that has horrified investigators, prosecutors, and a public that watched a young man rise to fame while a missing child's mother begged the world to remember her daughter's name. I'm your narrator, and you're watching Time and Crime. Before we go any deeper into this case, take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel, because the details you are about to hear were not pieced together overnight. They are the result of weeks of court filings, investigative reporting, and forensic analysis. And the story only grows darker from here. If you want to keep following cases like this one, your support is what keeps this channel digging into the truth. Now let's go back to the beginning, because to understand what happened inside that mansion, you have to understand who Celeste Rivas Hernandez was, how she disappeared, and how a 14-year-old girl from Lake Elsinore, California, ended up in the front trunk of a Tesla registered to one of the most talked about young artists in the music industry. Celeste Rivas Hernandez was reported missing on April 5th of 2024. She was 13 years old. Her family lived in Riverside County, California, and according to her mother, Celeste had run away from home before, but always came back. This time, she did not. The missing persons report described a young girl with dark hair, brown eyes, and a small tattoo on her right index finger. A single word that read, "Shh." That tattoo would later become one of the most haunting details in the entire case, because when investigators eventually identified the remains found in that Tesla, the matching tattoo on the right index finger was one of the clues that helped confirm her identity. Her mother told reporters that Celeste had been in a relationship with someone named David. She did not know his last name. She did not know where he lived. She only knew that her daughter had spoken about him and that he was older. For more than a year, Celeste's case received almost no national attention. She was one of thousands of missing children whose names appear on flyers, on social media posts, on the walls of community centers, and then slowly fade from public view as the world moves on to the next headline. Her mother kept searching. Her family kept hoping. And while they waited, the man now charged with her murder was building a career that would make him a household name. David Anthony Burke was born in Queens, New York, and later moved with his family to Houston, Texas. He began posting music online as a teenager, uploading songs he had written and recorded in his bedroom. And by 2022, one of those songs, a track called Romantic Homicide, had gone viral on social media platforms. The song's haunting melody and dark lyrics about a relationship gone wrong propelled him from obscurity into the upper reaches of streaming charts almost overnight. He signed a record deal. He moved to Los Angeles. He began touring. And by the time he was 19 years old, he was performing on stages across the country, with a debut album in development and a world tour on the horizon. By 2025, Burke had relocated to a rented mansion in the Hollywood Hills, A sprawling property with multiple bedrooms, a pool, and the kind of view that defines the lifestyle young artists dream about when they imagine making it in the music industry. He moved through that mansion with friends, collaborators, and members of his inner circle. He live-streamed gaming sessions, recorded music, and prepared for the release of his debut album, a record titled Withered, which was scheduled to drop on April 25th of 2025. His world tour was set to launch within days of that release. Everything in his life appeared to be moving in one direction, upward, faster, brighter. And then, according to the prosecution's timeline, on or around April 22nd of 2025, something happened inside that mansion that would change everything. Prosecutors allege that on the day before the album's release, Celeste Rivas Hernandez and David Burke had an argument. According to the legal brief filed in the case, Celeste threatened to expose the nature of their relationship, a relationship that prosecutors say had begun when she was just 13 years old, and he was an adult artist with a growing public platform. The brief alleges that she threatened to end his career and destroy his life if he did not meet her demands. And the prosecution claims that the next day, on or around April 23rd of 2025, David Burke fatally stabbed her. 2 days later, on April 25th, his debut album was released to the world. Within the same week, his world tour launched. He performed for crowds, he smiled for cameras, he gave interviews, and according to the prosecution, the body of the girl he had allegedly killed remained inside the home he was still using as his base of operations. This is where the case takes a turn that has stunned even seasoned investigators. Because the timeline laid out by prosecutors does not describe a panicked criminal trying to flee the scene. It describes a young man who allegedly continued to host friends, attend industry events, post on social media, and prepare for the biggest tour of his life, all while the remains of a 14-year-old girl were allegedly inside the property he was renting. And that is the context in which the now infamous livestream took place. The livestream itself has been described by multiple analysts who have reviewed the footage. In the video, Burke appears relaxed, surrounded by what appear to be members of his social circle. There is laughter, there is music, there is the casual energy of a group of young people gathered in a luxury home on a normal evening. And then, at some point during the stream, Burke acknowledges the smell. He does not do so with concern. He does not do so with confusion. He does so with humor. He blames the bathroom. He laughs about the bathroom. He invites others to laugh with him. And most of them do. But not all of them. Among the people in the room that night was an individual identified in publicly available footage as Neo Langston. According to multiple commentators who have analyzed the stream, Langston's expression during the bathroom remark stands in sharp contrast to the reactions of others. He is not laughing. He appears, according to those analysts, to be processing the moment differently than the rest of the group. It is important to state clearly that Neo Langston has not been charged with any crime, has not been named as a person of interest by prosecutors, and his presence in the footage carries no implication of wrongdoing. But his reaction has become a focal point for those reviewing the stream because it raises a question that hangs over the entire case. If the smell was as strong as the prosecution alleges it was, then how many people inside that house were aware that something was wrong? And how many of them simply accepted the explanation they were given? To answer that question, you have to understand what human decomposition actually smells like, and why the comparison to a backed-up bathroom is, according to forensic experts, not just inadequate, but absurd. Human decomposition releases a complex chemical signature that includes compounds with names like cadaverine and putrescine. The odor produced by these compounds is unlike any other smell a human being is likely to encounter in their lifetime. It is not the smell of garbage. It is not the smell of sewage. It is not the smell of rotting food or stagnant water. It is something else entirely. Forensic professionals who have spent decades working in death investigation describe it as unforgettable, overwhelming, and impossible to mistake for anything else. Rookie officers responding to their first decomposition scene often vomit on contact. Experienced investigators apply menthol ointment under their nostrils to create a barrier between their senses and the air. Cadaver dogs are trained for years to detect even trace amounts of the scent. And in the climate of a Southern California summer, with temperatures regularly climbing into the 90s, the speed and intensity of decomposition would have produced a smell that no air freshener, no candle, and no plumbing excuse could possibly explain. Yet according to the prosecution's timeline, that is exactly what was happening inside the Hollywood Hills mansion during the weeks and months that followed Celeste's alleged death. The album dropped, the tour began, Burke traveled, he performed, and the body, prosecutors allege, remained connected to the property he had been renting. At some point, according to investigators, the remains were placed inside the front trunk of a Tesla Model Y registered in Burke's name. And on July 29th of 2025, that Tesla was driven away from the mansion for what would turn out to be the final time. The man who has provided the most detailed public account of that final drive is a private investigator named Steve Fisher. Fisher was hired by the owner of the mansion that Burke had been renting after the property owner became aware of unusual circumstances connected to the tenancy. Fisher obtained footage of the Tesla being moved from the property on July 29th. According to his analysis, the vehicle had not been driven in an extended period before that date. Its exterior was visibly dirty, coated in the kind of dust and grime that accumulates on a car that has been sitting motionless for weeks. The windows were rolled down as it pulled away from the property, a detail Fisher described as significant because rolled-down windows on a hot summer day in a vehicle that had been stationary for an extended period would be one of the few ways to manage an overpowering interior odor. Fisher told reporters that in his professional opinion, the body of Celeste Rivas Hernandez was already inside the front trunk of that Tesla when it left the property that day. That same evening, Burke departed Los Angeles on a tour bus. The first leg of his world tour was scheduled to begin in San Francisco. According to publicly available reporting, Burke would not return to the Hollywood Hills mansion before the search warrant was eventually executed weeks later. Investigators believe that someone returned to the property the day before that warrant was carried out, but the identity of that person has not been publicly confirmed, and prosecutors have not narrowed down exactly who entered the home in those final hours. What is clear, based on the prosecution's filings, is that Burke himself was on tour, performing for fans across multiple cities, while the investigation that would eventually consume his entire life was beginning to take shape behind the scenes. The Tesla itself ended up impounded. According to multiple reports, the vehicle was towed after being left in a residential area of Hollywood, where neighbors began to notice an unmistakable smell coming from the car. When the Tesla was processed at the impound lot on September 8th of 2025, employees opened the front trunk and discovered human remains. The Los Angeles Police Department was called to the scene. The investigation that began that day would, within weeks, lead detectives back to the rented mansion, back to the Livestream footage, and back to the man whose name was on the Tesla's registration. The remains were identified as Celeste Rivas Hernandez, the little girl from Lake Elsinore, the 13-year-old who had been reported missing more than a year earlier, the teenager whose mother had spent every day since April of 2024 searching, hoping, praying that her daughter was alive somewhere, the girl with the tattoo on her right index finger that read, "Shh," the girl whose name had barely registered in the national media when she vanished, but whose case would now become one of the most discussed criminal investigations in the United States. When the news broke that the remains found in the Tesla had been identified as Celeste, the question that immediately consumed the public was what the connection was between this 14-year-old girl and the rising music star whose name appeared on the vehicle's title. That question would be answered by the prosecution's filings, which laid out a sequence of allegations that, if proven in court, would describe one of the most disturbing patterns of behavior ever documented in a celebrity criminal case. Prosecutors allege that Burke had been engaged in a relationship with Celeste from the time she was 13 years old. They allege that the relationship was sexual in nature. They allege that he was aware of her age. And they allege that when she threatened to expose what had been happening, he killed her. These allegations are formal charges. They have not been proven in court. Burke is presumed innocent under the law, and his defense will have the opportunity to respond to every claim made by the prosecution. But the charges themselves, as filed, paint a picture so disturbing that it has prompted comparisons to some of the most notorious celebrity criminal cases of the past several decades. The charge of continuous sexual abuse of a child under the age of 14 is not one that prosecutors file lightly. It requires a specific evidentiary threshold, including documentation of repeated conduct over a defined period. The charge of unlawful mutilation of human remains is even more rare, and according to the prosecution's filings, it is connected to allegations about how the body was handled in the days and weeks following the alleged murder. Prosecutors have alleged that, after killing Celeste, Burke took what they described as horrifying measures to destroy and discard the victim's remains. According to the legal brief, those measures included the use of an inflatable pool and a chainsaw. The brief alleges that Burke used the pool to contain the remains and used the chainsaw to remove the limbs. These allegations, if proven, would explain the condition in which the remains were eventually discovered, and they would also explain the smell that filled the mansion during the weeks that followed the alleged crime. The chainsaw allegation in particular has been described by legal analysts as one of the most disturbing details ever included in a celebrity murder filing, and it has shaped the entire public perception of the case from the moment it became public. Returning to the live stream footage, the question that has consumed analysts, investigators, and members of the public is how someone could appear so calm, so casual, so engaged in the rituals of normal life, while allegedly carrying the weight of what had happened inside that mansion. Clinical psychologists who have reviewed the available footage have offered a term that has become increasingly central to the public discussion of this case. The term is duping delight. It refers to a psychological state in which a person who has committed a crime or who is concealing a serious secret experiences a form of internal satisfaction at the act of deceiving those around them. The satisfaction is not sadistic in the conventional sense. It is rooted in the feeling of getting away with something, the feeling that the people in the room do not know what you know, the feeling that you are smarter, more in control, and more powerful than the unsuspecting individuals who treat you as a normal person. The behavior that has been described in connection with Burke during the weeks following Celeste's alleged death is, according to multiple psychological commentators, consistent with that profile. He attended his album release. He posted on social media. He gave interviews. He performed in front of crowds of fans. He smiled. He laughed. He live-streamed. He moved through the world as if nothing had happened, even as, according to the prosecution, evidence of an unimaginable crime sat inside the property he was renting, and eventually inside the trunk of his car. A psychotherapist who specializes in cases involving predatory relationships described this kind of behavior as a performance, one that requires a fundamental disconnect between observable conduct and internal experience. The same performance skill, according to that therapist, that allegedly allowed Burke to maintain a relationship with a child for an extended period without raising alarms among the people around him. It is at this point in the case that the questions begin to multiply, because the alleged crime did not happen in isolation. It happened inside a rented home, in a city full of music industry professionals, in a circle of friends and collaborators, in front of cameras that were running. People were there. People saw things. People smelled things. People heard things. And the question of what those people knew, when they knew it, and what they did with that knowledge has become one of the central threads in the ongoing investigation. Investigators have been interviewing members of Burke's inner circle. Analysts have been combing through hours of live stream footage. Reporters have been knocking on doors and reviewing public records. And every new piece of information that emerges raises further questions about how a child could allegedly die inside a home full of people without any of them, at any point, calling for help. Some of those questions point back to the live stream. Some of them point to the Tesla. Some of them point to the mansion itself, the property owner who eventually hired the private investigator, and the chain of events that led to the search warrant being executed in the first place. The mansion's owner has not been charged with any crime, and there is no public allegation that the property owner had any knowledge of what had allegedly occurred inside the home during Burke's tenancy. But the property owner's decision to hire Steve Fisher and Fisher's subsequent investigation of the Tesla and its movement played a documented role in the timeline that ultimately led to the discovery of the remains. The discovery itself, when it finally came on September 8th, was triggered by a complaint about a foul odor coming from a vehicle parked in a residential neighborhood. Neighbors reported the smell. The Tesla was towed. The impound lot processed it, and when the front trunk was opened, the contents inside changed the trajectory of David Burke's life forever. Within hours, investigators were on the scene. Within days, search warrants had been prepared for properties associated with him. Within weeks, the connection between the rising music star and the missing teenage girl from Lake Elsinore had become public knowledge. The reaction in the music industry was immediate. Burke's record label issued statements. His tour was canceled mid-run. Brand partnerships were severed. Streaming numbers, once climbing, began to fall. And the singer himself, who had been touring overseas at the time the remains were discovered, returned to the United States amid an investigation that would, within months, end with his arrest. In April of 2026, David Anthony Burke was formally arrested and charged with the murder of Celeste Rivas Hernandez. The charges included first-degree murder, continuous sexual abuse of a child under 14, and unlawful mutilation of human remains. He has not yet stood trial. He is presumed innocent of the charges against him until and unless he is convicted in a court of law. But the evidence laid out in the prosecution's filings, combined with the publicly available footage and the documented timeline of events, has made the case one of the most closely watched criminal proceedings in recent memory. For Celeste's family, the unfolding of these revelations has been an unimaginable ordeal. Her mother, who had spent more than a year searching for her daughter, has spoken publicly about the pain of learning what allegedly happened to her child. She has spoken about the moments in which Celeste mentioned someone named David. She has spoken about the moments in which she now wonders, with the benefit of a year of hindsight, whether there were warning signs she might have caught earlier. And she has spoken about the agony of knowing that, while her family was begging the world to remember her daughter, the man now charged with her murder was allegedly continuing to live his life as if nothing had happened. There is one detail in particular that has come to symbolize the entire case for many of those following it, and it is the matching tattoo. Celeste had a small tattoo on her right index finger that read, "Shh." According to multiple reports, David Burke had a similar tattoo on the same finger. When that detail emerged in the public reporting, it shifted the public perception of the case from the speculative to the concrete. It was no longer a question of whether there was a connection between the singer and the missing girl. The connection was visible, undeniable, etched into the skin of both of them. And the message of that tattoo, the single syllable, the universal gesture for silence, has taken on a meaning that no one who watches this case will ever be able to forget. Investigators have continued to expand the scope of their inquiry. Witnesses have been interviewed, devices have been seized, records have been subpoenaed, and the picture that has emerged, piece by piece, is one of a young man whose public image, as a sensitive, soft-spoken artist, stood in stark contrast to the allegations now contained in his charging documents. Songs that were once interpreted as poetic expressions of heartbreak have been re-examined in the context of the case, with some listeners and analysts pointing to specific lyrics that they argue take on new meaning given what prosecutors now allege. It is important to note that lyrics are not evidence in a legal sense. and a defendant's artistic output cannot be used to prove the elements of a crime. But the public reinterpretation of those songs has become part of the cultural footprint of the case. And it is one of the reasons why the story has captured the attention of so many. The mansion in the Hollywood Hills, where so much of the alleged conduct took place, has since been processed by investigators and returned to its owner. The Tesla has been retained as evidence. The live stream footage has been preserved. And the case continues to move forward through the legal system, with each filing, each hearing, and each new development adding another layer to a story that, at its core, is about a 14-year-old girl who deserved to be protected, who deserved to be found, and who deserved to be remembered. Celeste Rivas Hernandez was a child. She was someone's daughter. She was someone's sister. She was a person whose life mattered, whose disappearance should have been treated with the urgency it deserved, and whose story should not be reduced to a footnote in the rise and fall of a music industry star. And as this case continues to unfold, the obligation to keep her name at the center of the narrative, to refuse to let her be overshadowed by the celebrity of the man accused of killing her, becomes more important with every passing day. The questions that remain in this case are significant, and they are not abstract. They are practical, urgent questions that prosecutors are working to answer as the case proceeds. Who else was inside that mansion during the weeks following the alleged murder? What did they see? What did they smell? What did they hear? And what, if anything, did any of them say or do about it? These are not rhetorical questions. They are questions with answers, and those answers will likely emerge through the ongoing work of investigators, witnesses, and the legal process that will eventually bring this case to trial. The prosecution has indicated that its evidence includes not only the physical findings from the Tesla and the mansion, but also digital footage, witness statements, and forensic analysis of the timeline that led from April 23rd of 2025 to September 8th of the same year. Among the most consequential pieces of evidence is the live stream itself, which captured what prosecutors describe as a moment of consciousness of guilt. In legal terms, consciousness of guilt refers to behavior by a defendant that suggests an awareness of having committed a crime. Lying about the source of an odor that, according to the prosecution, was coming from a victim's remains would qualify as exactly that kind of evidence. Defense attorneys may argue that the bathroom comment was a joke, an offhand remark, or a misinterpretation of what was happening in the room. They may argue that the smell had other sources, that the timeline is inaccurate, or that the chain of custody on the relevant evidence is open to challenge. These arguments will be made in court, and the jury that eventually hears this case will be the one to decide what to make of them. But for now, in the court of public opinion, the live stream stands as one of the most damning artifacts in the entire case. It is the moment in which the world saw, in real time, a young man who, according to the prosecution, was allegedly concealing one of the most horrific crimes imaginable, and who appeared, in that moment, completely at ease. It is the moment in which laughter mixed with the smell of decomposition, in which a casual remark about a bathroom became a piece of potential evidence in a murder trial, and in which the divide between the public image of a celebrity and the private allegations against him became unbridgeable. And it is the moment that, more than any other, has come to define the public memory of this case. There is one more dimension to this story that deserves attention before we close out this part of the narration, and it concerns the broader cultural conversation that has emerged around the case. The disappearance and death of Celeste Rivas Hernandez has prompted renewed scrutiny of the way the music industry handles young artists, the way social media platforms enable contact between adults and minors, and the way missing children's cases are reported in the United States. Celeste's case received almost no national coverage during the entire period she was missing. Her name was not on the front pages of major newspapers. Her face was not featured in primetime news segments. And it was only after her remains were found, only after her death was confirmed, only after the connection to a famous musician was established, that the broader media apparatus turned its attention to her story. That delay is not unique to Celeste's case. It reflects a pattern that advocates for missing children have been pointing to for years, a pattern in which certain cases receive enormous attention, while others, often involving children from working-class families, families of color, or families without the resources to mount their own publicity campaigns receive almost none. Celeste's mother spoke about this disparity in interviews following the discovery of her daughter's remains. She spoke about the year of silence. She spoke about the social media posts that received almost no engagement. She spoke about the difficulty of getting anyone to care about a 13-year-old girl from Lake Elsinore who had run away from home before and whose disappearance fit the kind of profile that, fairly or unfairly, often gets categorized as low priority. What happened to Celeste Rivas Hernandez did not have to happen, and the conversation that her case has now sparked is one that her family, her community, and her advocates hope will result in real change. Better protocols for missing children's cases. Better tools for identifying predatory contact between adults and minors online. Better accountability for the systems that allow young, vulnerable people to fall through the cracks. None of these changes will bring Celeste back, but they may, in the long term, prevent another family from experiencing what hers has experienced. As we close this part of the narration, we want to thank you for taking the time to follow this case with us. The story of Celeste Rivas Hernandez and the charges filed against David Anthony Burke is one that will continue to develop over the coming weeks and months, with more court filings, more witness statements, and more revelations expected as the case moves toward trial. If this is the kind of in-depth, responsibly reported true crime coverage you want to see more of, please make sure you have liked this video and subscribed to Time and Crime. Hit the notification bell so you never miss the next part of this case, because in Part 2, we'll be going even deeper into the timeline, the investigation, the evidence, and the people whose names have begun to surface in connection with what happened inside that Hollywood Hills mansion. Your support is what makes this kind of work possible, and your engagement is what helps make sure that cases like Celeste's are never forgotten again. Stay with us, because the next chapter of this story is one you will not want to miss. The Tesla sat in a Hollywood neighborhood for weeks, untouched, undisturbed, parked along a quiet residential street where the daily rhythm of life moved on around it. Joggers passed it, delivery drivers parked beside it, neighbors walked their dogs past its silent frame. And inside that sealed metal shell, according to the prosecution's filings, the body of 14-year-old Celeste Rivas Hernandez was decomposing in the front trunk. Hidden from view, but no longer hidden from the senses of the people who lived and walked nearby. While that car sat motionless under the California sun, David Anthony Burke, the singer known to millions of fans as D4VD, was on the road, performing in venue after venue, posing for photographs with admirers, signing autographs, smiling for cameras, and continuing the world tour that had launched within days of what prosecutors allege was the murder of a child inside his rented Hollywood Hills mansion. By the time the smell finally became impossible to ignore, by the time someone called the authorities, by the time the Tesla was towed and transported to a Los Angeles impound lot, the remains inside had deteriorated to such an advanced state that visual identification was no longer possible. The medical examiner's office turned to dental records to confirm who the victim was. According to publicly available reporting, the specific records used to identify Celeste were her orthodontic records, the documentation of the braces she was still wearing at the time of her death. That single forensic detail collapses the entire case into a single unbearable image. A teenage girl, still in the middle of the years when most children begin and end their orthodontic treatment, identified in death by the very dental hardware that marked her as a child. Welcome back to Time and Crime, and if you have not yet hit that subscribe button, please do it now, because in this case, every new filing, every new piece of evidence, and every new revelation has changed what we thought we knew, and you do not want to miss what comes next. The orthodontic records are not simply a forensic detail. They are a moral document. They tell you the age of the victim in a way that no birth certificate, no ID card, and no court filing can ever quite match. Braces are something a child wears. They are something a parent pays for, often over years, often through monthly payments and adjustment appointments and rubber band changes, and the small, mundane rituals of growing up. Celeste was in the middle of that process. She was not done being a kid. Her teeth, her smile, her face were still being shaped by the orthodontic plan her family had set in motion before she ever met the man who is now charged with her murder. And when investigators needed to confirm that the remains in that Tesla belonged to her, it was that ongoing record of childhood that gave them the answer. The autopsy that followed has become its own focal point in the investigation, and not only because of what it documented, but because of how it was documented. Forensic analysts who have reviewed the publicly discussed elements of the report have noted several details that deserve careful attention. Among the most discussed is the matter of the body bag. According to the autopsy documentation, the bag used to transport Celeste's remains had 6 handles, and according to forensic professionals who have commented on the case, each of those handles was swabbed for DNA. The reasoning behind that protocol is straightforward. Body bags are not typically handled by a single person. The act of moving human remains into a bag, sealing it, lifting it, transferring it from one location to another, almost always involves more than one set of hands. By swabbing each handle for DNA, investigators preserve the possibility of identifying every individual who participated in the physical movement of the body, whether that movement occurred at the scene of death, during transport, or at any point in the chain that led from the alleged crime scene to the front trunk of the Tesla. If the DNA results from those 6 handles are eventually disclosed in court filings or trial proceedings, they could provide one of the most consequential evidentiary breakthroughs in the entire case. They could confirm whether Burke acted alone, whether others assisted him, and whether the circle of individuals who came and went from that mansion during the relevant time period included anyone who knew, helped, or actively participated in the concealment of what had happened. Until those results are made public, they remain one of the most significant outstanding questions in the investigation. But the very fact that the protocol was followed, that each handle was treated as a separate evidentiary surface, tells you something about how seriously investigators are taking the possibility that this was not a one-person crime in the operational sense, even if the prosecution maintains that Burke was the individual responsible for Celeste's death. The behavioral analysis of the case has also continued to evolve as more information has become public. Psychologists and criminologists who have commented on the available footage and the documented timeline have offered observations about what Burke's conduct in the weeks following the alleged murder reveals about his internal state. The general consensus among those commentators is that the conduct does not match the patterns typically associated with a person who has just committed a violent crime and is attempting to conceal it. There is no observable shock. There is no withdrawal. There is no period of social retreat or emotional disorientation. The schedule continues. The performances happen. The interviews are given. The social media posts go up. The live streams roll. And in those streams, the laughter is unforced. The energy is steady. And the conduct is, by every external measure, ordinary. That ordinariness is itself, according to the analysts, a behavioral signal. A person who has committed a serious crime and is trying to act normal typically exhibits what investigators call tells. Overcompensation in mood, forced cheerfulness, avoidance of certain conversational topics, hyper-awareness of how their behavior is being perceived. What multiple commentators have observed in Burke's post-alleged murder behavior is something different. The absence of effort, the ease that suggests that compartmentalization, the ability to seal off one part of one's experience from another, is not functioning as a coping mechanism, but as a default operating state. To put it more directly, the analysts have suggested that Burke does not appear to be performing normalcy in the days following Celeste's alleged death. He appears to simply be living it. It is important to be clear that these are observations made by professionals reviewing publicly available footage, not formal psychological evaluations conducted in a clinical setting. Burke has not been the subject of any publicly disclosed forensic psychological assessment, and any conclusions about his internal state are interpretations rather than diagnoses. But the consistency of those interpretations across multiple commentators, combined with the visible evidence of his conduct in the weeks and months following April 23 of 2025, has shaped how the public understands the human dimension of this case. The image that has emerged is not one of a panicked young man trying to hold himself together. It is one of a young man whose life simply continued as if the events the prosecution has alleged had no internal weight on him at all. That portrait, however, is not the only one being painted. The defense has begun to lay the foundation for an alternative narrative, and that narrative deserves to be examined with the same seriousness afforded to the prosecution's case. According to public statements from the defense, the Hollywood Hills mansion was not a sealed environment in which Burke was the only adult presence. People came and went from the property regularly. There were streaming sessions, there were social gatherings, there were collaborators, friends, members of his inner circle, and other individuals whose names have not been made public. The defense has noted that multiple individuals had access to the home during the relevant time period, and the defense has argued that the prosecution has not yet definitively proven that Burke was the individual physically responsible for Celeste's death at the moment it occurred. In legal terms, the defense is preserving its right to argue that even if Celeste's death occurred inside or in connection with the property, the question of who specifically caused that death remains an open one. That argument is a legitimate one for the defense to make, and any responsible discussion of this case must acknowledge that the burden of proof in a criminal proceeding rests entirely on the prosecution. Burke is presumed innocent. The defense is entitled to test the prosecution's evidence at every step, to challenge the chain of custody, to question the reliability of witness statements, to scrutinize the forensic findings, and to propose alternative theories of what happened. None of that is unusual. None of that is improper. It is the way the American legal system is designed to function. But the prosecution has not built its case on a single piece of evidence or a single witness account. It has built it on what forensic analysts have described as a mosaic of digital, physical, and behavioral evidence that, taken together, points in a single direction. A forensics professor commenting on the case has framed the prosecution's position through a series of questions, each one connected to a specific piece of documented evidence. Who, the professor asked, ordered the chainsaws on Burke's Amazon account? Who ordered the burn cage? Who ordered the body bag? Who ordered the kiddie pool that, according to the prosecution's filings, was used in connection with the alleged mutilation of the body, and which was reportedly purchased under a name that did not match any individual associated with Burke's known identity? Who, the professor asked, ordered the Uber that, according to investigators, brought Celeste to the mansion on the night she is alleged to have been killed? Who had a tattoo on Celeste's right index finger, the same finger that was reportedly amputated from the body before it was placed in the Tesla, the very finger that bore his name? And who, the professor asked, went to a middle school, found a classmate of Celeste's, and paid that child a sum reported to be $1,000 to deliver a secret cell phone, allowing communication between Burke and Celeste to continue after her parents had tried to end the relationship? Each of those questions corresponds to a specific allegation in the prosecution's filings. The chainsaws, the burn cage, the body bag, the kiddie pool, the Uber, the tattoo, the secret phone. None of those items, according to the prosecution, can be explained by reference to a household where multiple people had access to the property. They are not communal items. They are not social gathering supplies. They are, the prosecution argues, the operational infrastructure of a planned and executed crime, and the digital records associated with their acquisition lead in the prosecution's account to one place. They lead to David Anthony Burke. The allegation about the kiddie pool, in particular, has become one of the most discussed elements of the prosecution's filings. According to the legal brief, Burke allegedly used an inflatable pool in connection with the handling of Celeste's remains, and the pool was purchased under a fake name in an attempt to conceal the transaction. The combination of the pool and the chainsaws is the basis for the charge of unlawful mutilation of human remains, and prosecutors have alleged that the methods used to dismember and conceal the body were both planned and deliberate. These are allegations. Burke has the right to contest them, but the documentary trail behind them, according to the prosecution, is not speculative. It is built on Amazon order histories, delivery records, and account-level data that can be authenticated through the platforms themselves. The allegation involving the middle school classmate is, in many ways, the most disturbing element of the entire case from the standpoint of what it suggests about the nature of the alleged relationship. According to the prosecution, when Celeste's parents became aware that something was wrong and attempted to terminate the contact between their daughter and Burke, they took steps that would have cut off her access to him through ordinary means. Phones could be monitored, accounts could be deactivated, direct communication could be made impossible. But the prosecution alleges that Burke responded to those efforts not by stepping back, not by accepting the boundaries the family had tried to establish, but by going directly to Celeste's middle school, identifying a classmate of hers, and paying that child a substantial sum to deliver a covert phone. The purpose of the phone, according to the prosecution, was to allow communication to resume on a device the parents could not see, could not monitor, and did not know existed. If proven, that allegation describes a pattern of conduct that goes beyond a single act of misjudgment or impulse. It describes a sustained, calculated effort to circumvent parental authority and to maintain access to a child whose family had explicitly tried to end the contact. It also describes the recruitment of another minor, the classmate, into the architecture of that effort. The full implications of that allegation, both for the criminal case and for the broader conversation about how predatory contact between adults and minors is enabled by access to digital communication, will likely be a central focus of the trial proceedings to come. There is one more element of the autopsy report that has drawn extensive attention, and it requires particular care in how it is discussed. According to forensic professionals who have reviewed the publicly available portions of the documentation, the section of the report dealing with the reproductive system is unusually brief, consisting of approximately 3 bullet points and roughly 60 words. A forensics professor commenting on the case described that brevity as standard dictation that does not reach the level of granular detail typically expected in a complete autopsy of a young female victim. An amendment to the report was reportedly filed at a later date. According to the publicly available information, the determination on the question of pregnancy remains indeterminate. There is no public confirmation that Celeste was pregnant at the time of her death. There is no public confirmation that she was not. The forensic record, as it stands publicly, does not provide a definitive answer. But the question itself is one that has been raised in the public discussion of the case because of what it could mean for the prosecution's theory of motive. If Celeste was pregnant at the time of her death, that fact would transform the alleged motive from one focused on career preservation to one focused on what analysts have described as criminal self-preservation. A pregnancy would be evidence that could not be denied, deleted, or explained away. It would be a biological fact, a forensic record, a presence that would, in the most literal sense, make the relationship impossible to conceal. Whether or not pregnancy was a factor in this case is a question that may be answered through additional forensic testing, through the amended report, or through trial testimony. Until then, it remains an open question, and it should be discussed only with the level of caution that the indeterminacy of the public record requires. To assert what the record does not assert would be irresponsible. To ignore the question entirely when it has been raised by forensic professionals reviewing the case would be incomplete. What the public record does establish, beyond any meaningful dispute, is the timeline of how Celeste Rivas Hernandez and David Anthony Burke came into contact, and how that contact developed over the years that preceded her death. According to the prosecution's filings and the publicly available reporting, Celeste was approximately 11 years old when she first met Burke. She was a child in every legal, developmental, and human sense of the word. She was years away from being able to drive, years away from being able to vote, years away from being able to consent to any adult relationship under California law. And from that point forward, according to the prosecution, the contact between them deepened, intensified, and ultimately became the foundation for the abuse that the charges now describe. By the time of her death, Celeste had a tattoo on her right index finger that bore Burke's name. According to multiple reports, Burke had a matching tattoo on the same finger of his own hand, with a corresponding word. The matching ink became one of the most striking pieces of evidence linking the two of them publicly. But the tattoo on Celeste's finger has taken on a significance even beyond that public connection, because, according to the prosecution's filings, the finger that bore Burke's name was amputated from the body before the remains were placed in the Tesla. The deliberate removal of an identifying mark, if proven, is precisely the kind of evidence that prosecutors point to when they argue that a defendant was attempting to conceal the identity of a victim and the nature of the relationship between them. It is also, on a human level, one of the most chilling details of the entire case. Celeste also wore an engagement ring, according to publicly available reporting. She was a teenager who had been led to believe, by the man now charged with her murder, that she was in a relationship that would lead to a future life together. She believed in that future. She held on to it. And when, according to the prosecution, she eventually tried to step back from the relationship, when she tried to give the ring back, when she tried to assert her own boundaries and her own freedom, the response she received was not one of acceptance or release. It was, according to the charges, an act of violence that ended her life. The ring, the tattoo, the secret phone, the engagement Celeste believed in, the future she was promised, all of it dissolved into the evidence that investigators have now compiled and the legal proceedings that will determine Burke's fate. The grooming pattern that the prosecution describes follows what experts in child exploitation have long identified as a recognizable progression. It begins with attention. It moves to flattery, to the creation of an emotional bond, to promises of a future that, in the mind of the child, seems romantic and adult and special. It involves isolation, the gradual creation of a private world between the adult and the child that exists outside the awareness of the family, the school, and the broader social environment. It often involves gifts, technology, secret communication channels, and the creation of dependency. And in cases where the child eventually attempts to break away, where the child begins to recognize the harm, where the child threatens to disclose the relationship, the pattern frequently escalates, sometimes catastrophically. None of this is unique to the allegations against Burke. The pattern is documented in case after case, in research after research, in survivor testimony from across decades of advocacy work. What makes this case so devastating is the level of detail in the public record, the visibility of the artifacts left behind, and the fact that the alleged victim was identified, in the end, by the orthodontic records of a child who was still in the middle of becoming who she was going to be. The aftermath of Celeste's death, as described in the prosecution's filings and in the publicly available footage, involved Burke's continued participation in his own career. He performed, he toured, he livestreamed, he posted, he smiled. The body of the girl he had allegedly killed was, according to investigators, still connected to the property he had been renting, eventually transferred to the front trunk of his Tesla, eventually moved to the residential street where it would sit until the smell finally drew the attention of the neighborhood. Throughout that period, Burke was in motion. Concerts in one city, then another. Tour bus rides between venues. Hotel rooms in cities he had never performed in before. Meet and greets with fans who had no idea what was unfolding behind the scenes. And online, the streams continued, the laughter continued. The public face of D4VD remained as polished and as marketable as it had been on the day his album dropped. Inside the architecture of his digital footprint, however, the evidence trail was being preserved without him having to do anything to maintain it. Amazon kept records of every order. Uber kept records of every ride. Twitch kept records of every stream. Cell phone networks kept records of every call and every text. Tesla's own systems retained data about the vehicle's location, speed, and movement history. Property records documented the lease on the Hollywood Hills mansion. Surveillance footage from neighboring properties captured activity at the front gate. The modern world, in other words, generates a kind of forensic shadow that follows every individual through every transaction, every movement, every digital interaction. And in the case of David Anthony Burke, the prosecution alleges that shadow now contains the documentary record of one of the most disturbing crimes ever charged against a young celebrity in the United States. What investigators have had to do, in the months since the discovery of Celeste's remains, is reconstruct the timeline of those digital interactions and place them alongside the physical evidence collected from the mansion, the Tesla, and the body itself. The reconstruction is painstaking. Each Amazon purchase has to be cross-referenced with delivery confirmations, account access logs, and payment records. Each Uber ride has to be matched with start and end coordinates, driver records, and account data. Each Twitch stream has to be archived, time-stamped, and analyzed for content. Each cell phone communication has to be subpoenaed, authenticated, and integrated into the broader case file. And the result, when it is presented in court, will be a multi-platform digital narrative that, the prosecution argues, removes any reasonable doubt about what happened, when it happened, and who was responsible. The defense will, of course, contest the integrity of every link in that chain. That is its job. Its attorneys will argue that account access does not equal individual responsibility, that purchases on a shared device cannot be definitively attributed to a single user, that the chain of custody on digital evidence is more fragile than it appears, and that the prosecution's narrative reflects a coherence that the underlying records may not actually support. Those arguments will be tested in court, examined by experts on both sides, and ultimately weighed by a jury. Until that process is complete, the prosecution's allegations remain allegations, and Burke remains a defendant who is presumed innocent under the law. But the public conversation around this case has already moved past the question of whether the allegations will eventually be proven, and into the deeper question of how a 14-year-old girl could have been so isolated from the systems designed to protect her that her death, allegedly at the hands of a famous adult, could go undetected for months. The answers to that question are uncomfortable. They involve gaps in the way missing children's cases are prioritized. They involve the failure of digital platforms to adequately police contact between adults and minors. They involve the ways in which celebrity status creates a protective shield around behavior that, in any other context, would have triggered immediate intervention. They involve the limited resources available to working-class families trying to advocate for missing children in a media environment dominated by other stories. And they involve the simple, terrible fact that when a child runs away from home, even briefly, even once, the assumption that often follows is that she will return on her own, and that the urgency afforded to her case will diminish accordingly. Celeste's mother has spoken about that diminishing urgency in the wake of her daughter's death. She has spoken about the social media posts that received almost no engagement. She has spoken about the absence of national news coverage during the year and more that her daughter was missing. She has spoken about the loneliness of being a mother whose child has vanished and whose pleas for help do not break through the noise of a media ecosystem driven by other priorities. And she has spoken about the unbearable irony of watching her daughter's name finally enter the national conversation only after her body had been found in the trunk of a famous man's car. The recognition that Celeste's family deserved a year ago, the support, the resources, the attention, arrived only after it was too late to save her. That arithmetic is something her family will live with for the rest of their lives, and it is something the broader public should sit with as well. For those who have followed this case closely, the central challenge is to keep Celeste at the center of the narrative. The temptation, in any case involving a famous defendant, is for the story to become primarily a story about the defendant, about his career, about his music, about his rise and his fall, about the cultural reaction to the allegations against him, about the streaming numbers, the tour cancellations, the brand deals, the public statements. All of those threads are part of the case, and all of them will be discussed in the months and years to come. But none of them are the story. The story is Celeste. The story is a girl who was 11 years old when an adult man allegedly entered her life and began the process that would end with her body being identified through the orthodontic records of her braces. The story is a child whose family searched for her for over a year without significant national attention. The story is a victim who, even in death, must be allowed to remain a person rather than becoming a footnote in someone else's biography. The investigation continues. The discovery process is unfolding. New filings are expected to surface in the months ahead, and each one is likely to add another layer to a case that is already among the most disturbing celebrity criminal proceedings of the past several decades. The DNA results from the body bag handles may eventually be made public. The amended autopsy report may eventually be released or summarized in court filings. The full extent of the digital evidence, the Amazon records, the Uber records, the Twitch archives, may be presented in pretrial motions or at trial itself. Each of those revelations will reshape the public understanding of the case in ways that cannot be predicted. And until the proceedings conclude, the picture of what happened inside that Hollywood Hills mansion and of the months that followed will remain in motion. What we can say with confidence is what is already in the public record, that Celeste Rivas Hernandez was reported missing in April of 2024, that her remains were discovered in the front trunk of a Tesla registered to David Anthony Burke in September of 2025, that she was identified through her orthodontic records, that Burke has been formally charged with first-degree murder, continuous sexual abuse of a child under 14, and unlawful mutilation of human remains. That the prosecution's filings allege a pattern of grooming, a calculated effort to circumvent parental authority, and a deliberate concealment of the body and the relationship. That Burke maintains his presumption of innocence, that his defense will contest the charges through the legal process, and that the case will move forward through the established procedures of the American criminal justice system. Every claim beyond that public record must be treated with the appropriate qualification and care, and every allegation that is not yet proven must be presented as exactly that, an allegation, until the legal process resolves it. And yet, even within the boundaries of what is currently established, the case stands as one of the most haunting in recent memory. The live stream footage, with its laughter and its bathroom excuse, and the silent face of the friend who did not laugh. The Tesla, sitting on a residential street, slowly making its presence known to a neighborhood that had no idea what was inside. The braces, the tattoo, the engagement ring, the secret phone, the kiddie pool, the chainsaw, the burn cage, the body bag with 6 handles each swabbed for DNA. The album that dropped 2 days after the alleged murder. The world tour that launched the same week. The performances, the interviews, the social media posts, the smiling photographs, all of it taking place while a 14-year-old girl's family waited for any word about what had happened to their child. Each detail, on its own, would be devastating. Together, they form a portrait of a case that defies the ordinary categories of true crime narrative and forces a reckoning with how easily, in the modern world, a child can disappear, can be exploited, can be killed, and can be buried beneath the noise of celebrity culture for as long as the people responsible can keep the smell from reaching the wrong nose. Eventually, the smell did reach the wrong nose. The Tesla was towed. The trunk was opened. The remains were identified. The investigation began. The charges were filed. And the man whose name appears on the indictment now faces the most serious consequences the American legal system can impose. Whether the prosecution will prove its case beyond a reasonable doubt is a question that only a jury can ultimately answer. But the public record, as it stands today, is a record that demands attention, demands reflection, and demands that the name Celeste Rivas Hernandez never again be allowed to fade from the conversation about how children are protected, how predators are identified, and how the systems we rely on to keep our most vulnerable safe are succeeding or failing in real time. If you have made it to the end of this 2-part deep dive, thank you for staying with us, because cases like this one are difficult to sit with, difficult to research, and difficult to tell responsibly. If you believe that Celeste's name deserves to remain at the center of this story, please make sure you have liked this video and subscribed to Time in Crime. Hit the notification bell so you do not miss the next update on this case, because when those DNA results come back, when the amended autopsy is fully addressed in court, when the trial finally begins, we will be here to walk you through every development with the same care and the same commitment to documented facts. Share this video with someone who follows true crime responsibly. Leave a comment with your thoughts on what should happen next in this case, and let us know which other cases you want us to cover in future episodes. The content you have just watched is analytical in nature, based on publicly available sources, and is presented for informational and awareness purposes only. It does not represent official conclusions of any investigative or judicial body. All individuals mentioned, including David Anthony Burke, are presumed innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. Viewers are encouraged to consult additional independent sources for a complete perspective on the case. From all of us at Time and Crime, thank you for watching, thank you for caring, and thank you for refusing to let Celeste Rivas Hernandez be forgotten.